Do you feel like you and your spouse have grown apart? You feel like it's been ages since you connected and really felt the love and warmth of your partner? Feel like it's been forever ago since you guys were actually fully intimate and really had that physical intimacy that all of us crave? Well, guess what, guys? You're not alone in this. Your marriage can and it will get better after this episode as we discuss part 2 of our 3-part series on intimacy. Last week, we talked about emotional intimacy, which is really critical to this next part, and that's that physical intimacy. So welcome to the Legacy Driven Marriages Podcast, episode number 45. I am Walt McKinley, and I am here with my partner in crime and my co-host, and my amazing co-host, my wife, Stephanie McKinley.
Hey, everybody.
See, I'm trying to connect right now emotionally. That's what I was trying to do right there. Let's go. Today's episode, we're going to address physical intimacy barriers as we discuss some of the top things that are facing so many couples out there and really keeping them extremely disconnected in the physical aspect of their relationship. And guess what, guys? I got to tell you, it's all about a lot more than just having sex. And so we can't wait to dig into this episode with you and really talk about ways that you can reconnect with your spouse and ways that you can become one with your spouse again. Because at the end of the day, let's be real, man, like that's what we all crave. And so thank you so much for being here. Before we really get rolling today, make sure you hit that subscribe button on YouTube or on whatever podcast platform you're listening to. We don't want you to miss an episode. If you didn't listen to episode 44 on emotional intimacy, make sure that you listen to that, and make sure you listen to next week on spiritual intimacy, because when you can do all three of these things at a high level, man, your marriage is going to be tremendous. It's going to be amazing. It's going to be something that leaves a legacy. But most importantly, it's just going to keep you happy in where you're at right now. This is such a big deal to all of us.
Yes, I'm glad you just said that these 3 parts are really crucial for that ultimate marriage you're looking for, where, you're both truly happy and can be truly yourselves. And I think that's really important. Like he said, last week we talked a lot about emotional intimacy and that one was important to go first because I feel like that's really the foundation of all 3. It's really hard to connect on the other 2 if you don't have, it's really hard to connect on the sexual and spiritual part if you don't have the emotional part first.
And let's be real, right, Steph? As a human beings, we create connection, or we crave connection with other people. The connection you have with your spouse should by far be the most intimate connection that you ever have in your entire life. And so really being able to dig into these 3 parts that we're talking about and do these at a high level will have a direct effect, not only on their happiness, but definitely on your own. And I think that there's so many misnomers, like there's so many places feeding you disinformation on what intimacy is really supposed to look like and what intimacy really is. And so, we're going to start off, Steph, why don't you talk about the big lie that we're told about physical intimacy?
Yeah, so we want to start with saying the big lie about sexual intimacy is that a great sex life creates a great marriage. And that is a lie. It takes that emotional and spiritual intimacy and connected with the sexual intimacy to have a great marriage. And that's what we're hoping by the end of this episode, you're going to realize as we talk through some of these barriers to sexual intimacy that we think are some of the most important to recognize so that you can have a better sex life, because that is a contributor to a healthy marriage, but it's not the foundation. It's important to have all 3 of those intimacy pieces to really have a healthy marriage.
Yeah. And physical intimacy, like we talked about earlier, it's about so much more than sex. It's holding hands. It's somebody tickling your hair, tickling your back. It's rubbing each other's feet. It's a smack on the butt when you walk past your partner. It's the brush on the shoulder when you walk past him. It's a lot of things that maybe don't even feel intentional, or maybe you're not even doing in your own relationship right now, that's really preventing you from creating the emotional connection through the physical intimacy part of it too. So those things do truly go hand in hand with how your relationship goes. And the fact that people think, it's wild to me to think that, because I think even in my early 20s, I didn't think this way. The fact that people think, hey, if we've got a great sex life, the marriage is great. Like you said, it's such a lie. It's so false. Sex is so much better. Physical intimacy is so much better when you feel an emotional connection with somebody. I know, as we've been married 24 years, so since we were both much younger, but I can remember some of my single buddies, and they would just say, man, one day, Walt, I want to have what you and Stephanie have. I want to have that connection with somebody. And it's not like they wouldn't go out on the weekend and they wouldn't maybe meet somebody every now and again and go be physically intimate with them. But because there was no emotional connection as far as the intimacy goes, it was just really shallow. And at the end of the day, they felt really lonely, even if there was somebody sleeping in the bed right next to them, because ultimately they're leaving.
Yeah, something I really wanted to talk about that I want to point out, because I feel like it gets missed in there with, like he just mentioned, there's a lot more to sexual intimacy for a woman, especially, than a man can understand, I think, because for men, there's a very physical need there. And that's not always the case for a woman. So for a woman, a lot of times it's that non-sexual touch that we're craving. But when we get that, that leads us to want actual sex. So for me, I know, I can't speak for everyone, but I know a lot of women do feel this way. It's like he said, kind of the holding hands. We like to cuddle. We like hugs. We like that little kiss, to start the day, to end the day. Those things go a long way for a woman. And I don't know how else to explain it except that for us, it's kind of like we still need that touch to feel connected. And also it's like comforting. I don't know, there's like a protection to it. Like all that stuff plays in for a woman in a big way that I think men miss sometimes because they don't feel the same way about that. And it's hard for them to disconnect that physical need from that kind of physical touch sometimes. And I'm not saying that men don't need it too, but I think men, and it's like a little different. Like I know for Walt, like for him, it's like it's the tickling of his hair or like a massage, or he does like to hold hands and things like that. And he likes, like, a lot of times he'll just put his hand on my leg, or so he still likes that same physical connection. But I know for women, it's a lot more of like the hugging and cuddling and that kind of thing. And it's hard for a man to do that without feeling like he wants sex. So it's really important that men realize women need that. And sometimes they'll just back off from even trying to tell you that or want that from you because it always leads to sex and they don't necessarily want sex. So sometimes they're like, just never mind. I just won't even hug him or do that because I don't feel like having sex right now. And then they miss a big piece of that connection because they don't want to do that.
Yeah, I think, look, ladies, we know for most men, you could just blow us a kiss from across the room, and we're like, is that an indicator? You just looked at me right now. Are we going to the bedroom? It doesn't take us much time to get going. But what I will say is, and I think it's just older with some wisdom, as a man, the emotional connection does make the physical connection so much greater than it would be without it. And I think, but the reality of it is the way that we're just built, the way that God made us, men are typically just more physically and visually oriented than women are. Women are more emotionally oriented. And so the way that we even meet our physical intimacy needs is different outside of sex. And how much of that we need is much different too from an emotional connection point. I think if you ask most guys, do you need physical or emotional connection? Rank those 1 and 2. Guys would say physical intimacy, emotional intimacy. And if you asked 10 out of 10 women, they'd say emotional intimacy and physical intimacy. So really that's why the book said men are from Mars, women are from Venus. A lot of what you see in women and men's communication is men will have the blue headphones, women has the pink microphone. And so there's such a disconnect in what's important to us. And that's why we have these conversations on the podcast, is to bring that connection together where you really, truly do find that happy medium that can elevate your relationship and help you build a stronger marriage that takes you through the storms that we're just all going to experience if we're together long enough. And so let's jump in, because I think we've got to talk about these barriers to physical intimacy. I think all the stuff we talk about on here, it's about building just some situational awareness, just to have an idea of these things that maybe we have a blind spot to, that are making us struggle in certain aspects of our relationship. And so the first one I want to talk about in regard to physical intimacy and a real barrier is past relationships or experiences. And this can really be on both sides of that coin. I think there's childhood experiences around abuse, around sexual assault. There's adult experiences that happen with that too, that can really hinder our ability to trust, our ability to want to be hugged. Sometimes it accelerates our sex drive and we don't even realize or attribute it to those past experiences too,
Good point.
versus just suppressing it and shutting it down. And so I want to make sure we talk about that a little bit, Steph, because I think that that's such a big part of this puzzle.
I know we have a lot of friends that have these type of issues where they had past, either from childhood or past relationship, they had some really bad experiences where there was either abuse or assault or that type of thing, and it definitely it goes into their current relationships. And I think, Walt brought up, sometimes we know someone that said like they didn't even like their partner to come up behind them and hug them because they were abused in the past, and so when he would come up behind her to give her a hug, which normally a woman would love, um she would kind of shudder and like jump away, and he had a hard time not taking that personal, because he was like, I'm trying to hug you and you're backing away. How it's hard not to feel like, what did I do? Like, how did, why wouldn't you want me to hug you? But, she had past experiences that made her that way.
Well, and I think part of that too is, as a man, then now he feels rejected.
Right.
Maybe there's some experiences where he was rejected in a previous relationship, or he was rejected in his childhood. Now there's deep seated feelings that are going to come along with that are going to cause a lot of tension in a relationship. So we're going to talk about how to really divert that energy and how to change the narrative on that. But I want you guys to really focus on this more from the perspective of, if when some of these barriers we talk about, if you think, hey, that's me, it's okay.
Just recognizing.
Yeah. And,
that.
and consider it a challenge and an opportunity to elevate yourself if you recognize yourself in some of these, because it's super vitally important. And I think for men especially, it's important for us to understand, because we're physical and we might come behind our spouse and try to give them a hug, and they might jump, and then we take it personally, and we really shouldn't take it personally in that moment. It's really tough in that emotional moment to not take it personally, but take a step back and ask yourself, why did my partner just shudder when I tried to hug them from behind? And have that conversation with them, because maybe they've never even had it, or maybe they don't even know why they do that. They just do naturally and react in the moment. And the more you can do that, man, you want to talk about building some emotional intimacy, which is going to elevate your physical intimacy, being able to take your own emotion out of it and see the bigger picture and connect with your spouse and have empathy and understanding. And maybe you don't come up from behind them for a while anymore. Maybe you walk up in front of them and give them a hug instead. And that's what they need, because that's what they relay to you. This kind of stuff, when it comes to this past relationship or experiences and the way that we've handled our traumas, really does affect.
Yeah, I have to even
this.
say, sorry, this just made me think of an example between us that happened. And it just,
I don't even know what Steph's about to say, you guys. Look out now. We didn't practice this one.
I was actually sleeping on the couch, and I was going to kiss his forehead or kiss his head or something. And he swung at me out of his sleep. Like it was like it startled him out of his sleep. And then he like swung at me and like totally didn't even realize it was me. And it kind of caught me off guard, because this was earlier in our relationship too. And, but he had experiences as a child where, he had abuse in his life. So he kind of just reacted, and I have to say, I was just trying to do something nice, and I wasn't expecting that reaction at all. So of course that led, we had to have a talk about that. But he ended up explaining to me like it just was a reaction.
Well,
And
it was a genuine reaction. I mean, picture yourself sleeping on the couch trying to take a little afternoon siesta, and you turn around, you just feel a face hovering right above your face, because that's what it was for me. But because I had
you
experienced
probably
so
just
much,
felt a presence.
right, but because I had experienced so much trauma in my childhood, sometimes getting woken up out of a sleep to be hit, it was a total reaction in the moment. And those are things I didn't think that I would really ever do that. I don't remember actually swinging, but I remember putting my fist back and you jumped backwards before I could do anything.
You surprised yourself, I think. Even you were surprised that you did it.
Oh, for sure. I was startled coming out of sleep. I mean, just straight startled coming out of sleep. So those are the little things that we're talking about, though. And we're being kind of funny in this example, but that's a real example. Stephanie's just being sweet, trying to give me a little kiss on the cheek or give me a kiss on my forehead. It's kind of wake me up out of my nap, really nice, which most men would be like, yeah, wake me up with the little kiss. I like that. Instead, she almost got swung. So I didn't know I was going to turn into Mike Tyson in that critical moment right before she gave me a kiss. So
I can't remember now either if that was a time where you made contact too, and like it just caught me off guard too. So I was like, I reacted also. Like I
no,
can't remember if that was
no, you jump back. You jump back. I mean, quick. Like, I didn't even know Stephanie had that kind of reaction time. She could have been a professional fighter, maybe. Who knows? All right, so let's move to the next one, the barriers to our physical intimacy. And like I said, we're going to talk about solutions and what you need to do after we get through a couple more of these. The other thing that I see really affecting negatively relationships from just an intimacy perspective, period, especially from a physical intimacy piece, is just the busyness of our lives and the way that we just run a million miles an hour for everything, whether it's taking the kids or jobs or activities or trying to keep up with friends or, trying to keep up with family, to where you don't even really get to connect as a couple. And then when you do get to connect, when you go to bed at night, both people or one versus the other is really tired. And if you ask a high sex drive person if they're too tired to have sex, they'll always say no. Right? Wake me up out of a sound sleep. I don't care what you got to do. Let's just make something happen. But you ask a person who maybe has a lower sex drive where it's not as necessary for them in that moment, they would rather just get some sleep. And so when you're busy and you're tired and you're exhausted, it really does hamper your physical intimacy in your relationship. And that's why we say it's not just sex, it's holding hands, it's the caresses, it's the cuddles, it's all of these other things that are really vital to making sure that you're doing so you don't lose that connection in those seasons when you're just running and gunning and you're not stopping.
Yeah, something Walt and I learned when we were in that lower point in our relationship and it was kind of a dark place. We let the busyness and exhaustion really get in the way. And I have to say, like, especially having young kids was next level exhaustion. And, there's sleepless nights. Sometimes you're up in the middle of the night with them. Even as toddlers, they're coming in and waking you up at all times of the night. And we almost never got a full night's sleep, it felt like. And so we were always feeling sleep deprived and always kind of on edge from that. And that led to a lot of just even arguments in itself of that. And this is another reason why the communication piece becomes so important, because you really have to communicate if you're feeling this way, because sometimes if you're really just tired and exhausted and you tell your spouse that, sometimes they think that's just an excuse and they're not going to take that the right way. So sometimes it needs a little more explaining of maybe just how exhausted you are, or just saying like, no, seriously, this is really, I'm too tired. And if that's the case, then you should plan. This is where we were talking about, if you have to put it on your calendar, do it, because it is important and necessary for your relationship to have this connection. So you need to make time for it. So at least the higher sex drive person, or the person who was ready and you weren't because you were too tired, at least they can feel like, I know it's going to happen at some point, and you're not just putting me off and I never know when it's going to happen, and then I'm just going to have resentment. It's better to at least say, well, I know on this day I plan to like hopefully have more energy and this would be a better time for me. At least they know that you're making that effort. It does go a long way and it really makes a difference.
Scheduling is great. I think even for your spouse to say, hey, can I take a rain check? I'm just exhausted. It's been a really long day. I'm not in the mood. But then if you take a rain check, it's got to be a rain check, not a rain check for 3 months either. It's got to be a rain check that's reasonable in that moment. And by the way, it's okay for the high sex drive person, if they're physically exhausted and tired, to say, you know what, I'm tired right now.
Right. And it's hard for the low sex drive person. If the high sex drive person says that they're tired and exhausted, they may start thinking things like something else is going on because that's not normal for you. So you better have some explanation or, something that you can give your spouse so that they're not thinking that you're just, putting them off and it's really something else. And this is where you really do have to talk about this stuff.
But again, that's where the emotional intimacy comes into play, right? That's where the little physical intimacy stuff, the touching, the holding hand,
Right.
like those little things come into play. So that when it is just a period and a season of exhaustion in your life, there's not extra strain put on your relationship because now insecurities are getting in the way of what you think that the other person is thinking when all they're actually thinking is that they're really tired. and that's okay. And so the next one we want to talk about is just insecurity with your body. And I think the guys too, I could lose 15, 20 pounds. Of course, I would like to lose 15 or 20 pounds, but I promise you that's not going to keep me from making some magic happen. And I think that most of the time, guys, they don't feel the same body insecurity that women do because we don't have the same societal pressures that women have. And so, but insecurity of how you look really does negatively affect your willingness to be physically intimate with your partner or to take a compliment from your partner, even if they say, baby, you looking good in them jeans, man. And they turn around and, oh my God, no, I don't. I just look really fat right now. No, I actually didn't think that at all. I thought you just looked really amazing in them jeans. So that insecurity with your own body is really important to feel comfortable to open yourself up, not only to the physical intimacy, but to the sexual intimacy aspect of that too.
Yeah, and women, this is a hard one for us because, like he just said, I think we feel a different level of pressure about how we look based on our culture and our just everything around us in society is always keying in on how a woman looks. So this piece is really big to us. And it's really important for the men in our life that they understand how much this really affects us. So any little comments that you make about our weight or how we look, or you comment on some other female, or you're looking at porn, all of these things affect how a woman feels about herself. And so it's really critical, that you say, even be complimentary to your woman. And it doesn't have to be over the top, but her feeling beautiful to you is what really matters. So it does matter that you don't make certain comments or you do tell her she's beautiful, or because she just needs to feel beautiful to you. But I'm telling you, a lot of times men aren't even aware of this or think about this, but sometimes just comments that they make about some other woman walking by or some woman on TV or some picture they saw or any comments they make on women in general affect how she's feeling about herself, not just comments to her directly. She's taking in all of this stuff because we're always being judged on our looks. So this one hits home for us really big. And I'm not saying that men don't have their own insecurities, but it's a big one for women. I can really tell you that. So we were going to talk a little bit further down about the porn and stuff, but this stuff does matter too, because when men look at porn, it also sends a message to the woman that makes her feel like, if you have to look at that, then I must not be good enough. And she's going to compare herself to that. So all of this plays into your sexual intimacy. So for men, if you find that your woman is not wanting to have sex, there can be deeper reasons such as this. It can be really her insecurity or it could be how you're making her feel. It could be how other people around her are making her feel. But in general, if she's feeling insecure about her body, it's going to make it hard for her to be physically intimate with you.
Every single person wants to feel seen, heard, and wanted. Our job as a spouse to our partner, if we're really invested and committed into our marriage, is to make our partner feel wanted and desired and feel like they're the only person that we're looking at. That's our number one job. And if we're doing a poor job at that, their insecurity will continue to grow. So you really got to ask yourself, have I invested into my spouse and making sure that I've eliminated the insecurities that are under my control and the words that are coming out of my mouth, or the porn that I decided to watch and comment on, or the girl that I turned my head as she walked past as my wife was sitting next to me at dinner. We have to be super intentional about those things, because if we're not, we're going to lose our emotional connection, our spiritual connection, and our physical connection. And that's when divorce happens. It will atrophy over time. But this piece of it, it's like going on a fast slip and slide. It's like going 20 times faster to divorce if you're not intentional about this. And so we'll talk about the porn thing on that too. Porn literally rewires your brain. It is not healthy. And it is also not something that we should be visually taking in. And by the way, 25% of people addicted to porn are women. So it's not just the men in this. And I read a statistic that says it takes 3 years for you to fully recover and mentally rewire your brain back to what's normal when you've looked at porn. And the difference is now, it's when I was a kid, I mean, you had to go take a magazine from your parent or
Right.
try to figure out some way to get a hold of that. Now it's so abundantly available. I mean, you can't even scroll through a social media feed without seeing some sort of thirst trap or something that's diverting your eyes, taking your emotion or your physical attraction off of your spouse at that moment and putting it on somebody else. That it's almost like you said, it's almost scary that that's the reality of what we live in. And so the intention it takes to stay away from that is probably more than it's ever been. But when you understand not only what it does to you, but what it does to your partner, and more importantly, your relationship and your marriage, it's a lot easier to approach that with the intentionality that we all need to make sure that we're not going down that slippery slope.
Yeah, we've seen some scary statistics on porn addiction, and we're seeing it even, I'm going to be honest, at our church, there's like a high level of people that have an addiction that they're trying to break.
Mm-hmm.
And we've seen several couples, there's a lot of couples we know that this has affected their marriages. And it's really huge. Like a lot of the ones that we knew that had this issue are now divorced.
Yep.
Because, I mean, if your addiction to that is so strong, like what does that leave your spouse? Like how do they compete with that? They can't, and they never will. So, I mean, you're really setting yourself up for a lot of disappointment there, and it's really hard to come back from. And not that you can't, but it takes a lot of intention. I mean, a next level intention to work on and repair that.
The thing is, you can literally come back from everything. One of the barriers we won't talk about is a spouse who's cheated, because I think that's everybody should know what that barrier looks like. All of these things you can come back from. There's got to be a lot of forgiveness, a lot of trust regained, a lot of give from the person who hurt who hurt their spouse. There's got to be a lot of give and take when it comes to that, and then most importantly, a lot of dialogue about what it's done, what you've learned, and then what you're going to do about it now in order to really repair your relationship. And porn is one of those places that has disastrous effects long term on us as individuals. And by the way, I come from a military background where it's abundant. It's
I was just
abundant
going to mention
and
that too.
applauded and celebrated almost. And so, but what I do know for a fact is that women will feel the insecurities way more amplified than they ever would before if a husband's looking at porn consistently, because she knows she's probably being compared to what her husband has been watching. And that's just not okay, guys. We need to have some self-awareness and some damn accountability in this life to say, I got to be better than that. I have to make the right decision. I got to be stronger, because nothing is more important than my marriage and my relationship. Definitely not some magazine or some video that I'm about to watch. We got to take the accountability, and especially men. We got to start acting like men and leading our homes in a way that elevates them, not suppresses them.
Situations like military, like I know Walt was in the Navy and men are out on a ship for months at a time and you have needs. And that's how a lot of this starts. But then you've got to realize when you are with your partner, it's going to come between you. And porn oftentimes is not what reality is like at all. I mean, even the people in it have been, you know, they've changed
Enhanced.
their very enhanced, and there's all kinds of things that just don't happen in a normal bedroom. So it really just it sets the stage for something that's not even realistic and you're never going to live up to. So it's a dangerous place to be when it comes to having a healthy marriage.
So the last thing we want to talk about, one more barrier, then we're going to get to some, how do you really solve this? What's some solutions that we have? What's some tactical things that we can start doing in our relationship now to move past some of these barriers? And the last one is kids. Everybody who has kids probably just laughed.
Children is definitely a barrier.
Children will literally suck the life out of your relationship in so many different ways. And I say that with so much love for my amazing daughters who are now young ladies, young women. But when kids are little, especially, I mean, they need the hand holding. They want to get their back tickled. They need to be fed. Then you're running them to sports and you're running them back and forth to school. And there's activities and PTA. Plus you're going to work all day. There's all these things that are already making our life hard. And then we've got these amazing human beings that we're responsible for the care and feeding of and loving of. And sometimes that just leaves your relationship in a place where you guys don't really have a lot of love for yourself anymore, where you're so disconnected that you're wondering how you even got to this place where you don't even hug on your spouse or hold their hands. But really it's because the children have diminished your ability to do that because you're giving everything you have to them. And that's why in your marriage, you and your spouse got to even become, that's why in your marriage, you and your spouse have to come before your kids. Because the stronger your marriage is, the stronger you and your spouse are as partners, the better parents you're going to be and the better home you're going to raise your children in. It's that critical. And Stephanie and I, we didn't put any equity into that back in the day. We just wanted to be the best parents we could. And we would find time for each other afterwards. And we realized we really had that backwards from where it should have been.
Oh, absolutely. And the thing is, we're in a place now where our kids are grown. But when they're little, it feels like that's going to be that's an eternity away, and we realized through all that, here we are now and they're grown and it's back to me and him. And so that relationship's so important because you only have your children for a short time and you were a couple before them and you're going to be a couple after them. And so that relationship takes precedence. And I understand that when they're young, they do kind of get the priority because at least at first, for a while, they really need you to be doing everything for them. But you still have to be intentional about making that time for your relationship. And that was the part that we got wrong, very wrong. And we didn't put as much effort into our relationship as we should have. And as a result, we were very near divorce. And our children would have grown up not having their family together. And this is why we do this podcast, is for that reason right there, is we realize that we need to start realizing that marriage, that relationship is the most important thing over everything else. And not to say that doesn't diminish your children or your relationship with your children. It's just to say that the marriage comes first because everything else stems from that. The marriage is the foundation. And your children will be healthy and thriving if your marriage is healthy and thriving. And we realize this is why we key on date nights and all that so much, because you have to have that connection with your spouse. If you don't find time for connection with them, you grow apart.
Mm-hmm.
And all those little things really matter. Like we were saying, some of the biggest things I noticed that we got away from was the stuff like I told him, you giving me a kiss in the morning before you left actually meant a lot to me. I didn't realize how much until you stopped doing it. And then we came
Meanwhile, I
back
was
to
just trying not to wake her up because I was leaving really early.
and the holding hands, you don't realize like you're always holding your kid or you're holding their hand and so you stop holding your spouse's hand. So you have to create time and moments where you can do that with your spouse still and you don't lose that connection with them because it will happen. If you don't put that intention into holding your spouse's hand and cuddling with your spouse and giving them hugs, you will grow apart because whatever you're feeding, whatever you're giving life to, whatever you're feeding into, wherever you put your energy flows. And if you stop putting that into your spouse, pretty soon you won't have a relationship.
And it's almost like you don't even see that happening when it's happening until you get to a point where you're so disconnected that you look at your spouse one day and say, I don't even know you anymore. Who have you become? And there's so much resentment and contentment there that you're on this slippery slope and path to marriage unless you really get in the arena, start fighting for your relationship and work to save it, which will ultimately elevate it. And I listened to a podcast a while back with Jordan Peterson in it. He talked about in there, you're going to spend the first 18 years of your life, of your kids' life with them. After that, the aggregate of the rest of the time you spend with your children is 1 year. 1 year as they go out and do life because you're not with them every single day. And it makes me sad as a parent, but goes back to your point, Stephanie, where you said the most important relationship you have is between you and your spouse. And so what are you even supposed to do about it? So we talked about all the barriers. There's a lot.
So and there's more than we even just talked about.
Right. Double them.
Yeah.
And you see, we're already at 36 minutes. So what can we do about it? I think the first thing, we always talk about communication in this one. So Steph, I'll take the first one. You take the second one. You need to share your wants, your needs, and your desires with your spouse. They're not mind readers. They can think that they're loving you in the way that you need it. But if they're not hitting the mark, you need to have that conversation with them. And you need to find a compromise that works for both of you coming out of that conversation. For example, Steph and I'm a man. I'm a high sex drive person. Years ago, I could have had sex every single day. And it's funny, the group we were facilitating, I think probably most of the men, I think, said that in that group. But I could have had sex every single day. Stephanie didn't have the same sex drive as I did. It didn't mean she didn't have the same need for physical intimacy as a whole, just not that aspect of it. So we agreed on 2 to 3 days a week. That was like both of us meeting halfway. As we met halfway, we realized it wouldn't necessarily happen every week on schedule like that, but we were both intentional about making sure that we kept that compromise intact. And it increased our physical intimacy in those moments.
Yeah, next we were going to say schedule time if you need to. So I mentioned that a little bit earlier, and I've mentioned it on other podcasts, but you have to, especially when you have children or you have really busy schedules or your schedules are off from each other. I know people who work different shifts and you're like ship sailing in the night, you're not really, you have to schedule that time in. And it's, like I said, it's so important because if you don't, you will grow apart. So make the time for each other, even if that means you're just like 20 minutes at the end of the day to just check in with each other and talk a little bit and maybe some cuddle time. Like you got to do what you got to do. I mean, we've lived in that place where you're like ultra busy and it's hard to find time for anything. You're not even finding time for yourself, but you do have to make that time. And it's really important. It should be daily. Daily, you need to make some kind of time for each other, but then also schedule those date nights and those just time away also, because you need that time together. You need quality time together. I know for me, and this is where I'm going to talk about the love languages for a second, just because that's really important too. The part of that communication is telling each other, if you haven't already, read the 5 love languages, the book by Gary Chapman, and learn what your partner's love language is, because sometimes you're not showing them love in the way that they need it. Most of us try to love each other the way we want to be loved, and that's not always how your partner is going to receive it. So you may be, and that's where a lot of times this disappointment and frustration comes in, is because you're like, I'm loving you. Like, I feel like I'm doing the things that, I would want, but that's not necessarily what they want. And so you may not be filling their bucket at all when you think that you are. And then you're both disappointed and frustrated. So, really have those conversations, really figure out the love language and love your partner the way they need to be loved, because man, that will go so much further. When you don't have a lot of time to spend together, if you find those little ways that just fills their bucket, go such a long way. Like I'm saying, like there's coffee people who like if you just get them a coffee to start the morning, man, you might have just set up their whole day, and they're just like, man, they're feeling so loved, and they'll come back and give that back to you in whatever way you need it.
Yeah, I love that. And by the way, scheduling time to be physically intimate might seem very clinical, but really there's an anticipation from knowing on Friday night, y'all are going to go on a date, and then you're going to get to come home and you're going to get to be physically intimate, which also is great for a woman because a woman's more like a crock pot and a man's more like a pressure cooker.
Right. So in that situation, if you go on the date, this is why it usually works for the man and woman, why a date works really well, because generally the woman wants your quality time, wants that time with you, and you have good conversation and you're spending time with her, and it's all about, she's getting your attention.
She's feeling the emotional intimacy bucket is getting filled.
And then when her emotional needs are met, she feels more like wanting to be physical with you, and then the man gets his need met.
And then everybody wins. If that ain't a dang win-win, I don't know what really is. And so I think also it's just on that note, it's understanding each other's physiological needs. There's typically a high sex drive, low sex drive person. We talk about it men versus women a lot because 80% of the time it's men versus women. I think it's really important to understand what your partner's physiological needs are. Men need a release. And ladies, this doesn't mean to use sex as a bargaining chip. If you help me do this, then we'll have some A double snakes. We'll have some boom boom tonight. That is
That's
such
our
a
code
poor
word.
way. That's what we got to make up. When you got little kids, you got to make up code words. Now they don't want to be around us if we say anything like that. But ladies, you cannot use sex as a bargaining chip in your relationship. You will build a transactional relationship where your spouse only does something for you to get something in return. And men, you can't say, if we cuddle, then we get to have sex. It can't be both ways. There's got to be a happy medium and a compromise in a relationship, because that's what a relationship needs to thrive. Find the compromise after you talk about wants, needs, and desires, where both people feel like they're getting something out of it and they're receiving something from their spouse. They're not just having a spouse that's taking from them. So understand the needs.
Yeah, I've mentioned this previously, but I had to have it helped me to know. I did some research on the man's physiological need with that, and that helped me to feel like, okay, I do really need to have some more give on that, because even though I'm not feeling the desire all the time, he has an actual need for that. And so sometimes women, I think if you are in the same boat as me or the lower sex drive person, you need to maybe read up on some of that, the physiological needs of what that is and what that looks like. And it may help you to kind of understand where they're coming from.
Yeah, just understanding it. That's the big thing. Once you understand it, then you're like, oh, okay, now I get it.
So you guys, I kind of want to finish out by saying that all of marriage is foreplay. And by that, I mean, this is why we're going to talk about all three parts of the intimacy, because it really takes all three. And the biggest thing, I read this, and I'm just going to kind of read it to you for a second because I thought it was a very impactful statement, that connecting through good communication as you respect and serve each other throughout the day is the best way to prepare you for sexual intimacy. And that is so true. If you are doing those things like we just talked about, and you're loving and serving your spouse throughout the day, that is what is going to lead to that physical intimacy that kind of culminates it. It's like, it's that extra piece. It's like the icing on the cake, where if the other things are being met and that need is met emotionally and spiritually, then it makes the physical part that much better. It's so much better when you have all of it together. And this is for men and women, if they're feeling their needs being met in more of a way, like their deep emotional needs and whatever it is that the way that they feel their love tank, if that stuff is being met, then it shows up in the physical intimacy in such a big way that, man, you will just feel such a connection you've never felt when you bring all those pieces together. And it's not just purely physical. There's a totally different feeling there. And I think, Walt can probably expound on this, because it's a little different for men and women, I think, where I feel like men can have more of a detachment, and sometimes it's like they just want to meet that physical need and they can detach emotionally a lot easier than a woman can. I'm not saying that women can't, but in the general, I think men can do that easier than a woman. And so that piece, but they will find that if they're meeting the woman's emotional need, the physical is going to be so much better.
Yeah, absolutely. Like Steph said, all marriage is foreplay. Look, guys, I don't think you've ever realized what chore play is. Fellas, get in there and do some dishes. Promise you, you will be more sexy in that moment than you ever could be if you wore a thong to bed. So get in there and have some fun. Turn on some slow jams, wipe the counter, do the dishes, mop, help fold some laundry. It's amazing what can happen when you're being a equitable partner in some of those things, and you're taking some of the burden off your spouse, and vice versa, right? Depending on what the roles in the home are, you're taking some of that burden off your spouse in order to make you feel more connected.
Your woman will have so much more energy for you.
And appreciated. And then the energy, right? And we talked about it, busyness and exhaustion's second thing we talked about today. So I think
the more you do to help each other, the better it will be.
the more you realize that if the emotional and the spiritual intimacy, we're going to talk about spiritual intimacy next week, is like this, the more you bring that together, the more the physical intimacy is going to happen organically, because physical intimacy is God's way of bringing us together as one. And that's why you have that emotional, that spiritual, it comes together as one. And you can really have a very, very strong, physically intimate relationship, but it doesn't come before the emotional and the spiritual piece.
Yeah, that's why I say the emotional is really the foundation. You have to connect emotionally, be filling each other's bucket to reach that physical intimacy on another level. Sure, you can do the physical act, but it's not going to be the same if you don't feel emotionally fulfilled, either party. So
listen to this with your spouse, and then y'all go get physically intimate afterwards. Look, guys, we've had a lot of fun with this one today. Thank you so much for showing up. Don't forget to join our Facebook group at Legacy Driven Marriages. Share this episode with your friends, because good Lord, if we're in relationships, we all need an episode like this. And if you have any questions or topics you'd like for us to discuss, make sure that you hit us up on every social media channel or legacydrivenmarriages.com. Shoot us a note, shoot us an email. Let us know what you'd like to hear us talk about. But these topics are fun for me, Steph. I'm going to tell you that. Because intimacy is everything in a relationship. So look, guys, until the next time.
Get into the arena of your marriage. Keep fighting for your relationship. Keep elevating your generational legacy. And we'll see you guys next Tuesday.
See you guys.